Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I know it's been a while and I really apologise for that. I've not been particularly well at the start of this new year, as you can probably still hear in my voice. Yeah, not particularly great start to the new year for me. I've had some breathing problems and some coughing problems at the start of this year. I lost my voice. It's only just about coming back. The number of days that video was really annoying me on my channel, so I thought I'd just pop on and give another transfer update. Another little look at where Newcastle are in this window, 10 days in now. Thank you so much for all the views, over 1,600 on my Q&A video, which I really appreciate. If you'd like me to do more of those sorts of things, do leave some comments in the box below. Tweet me at Harry DeCosmo, or my email is on my Twitter as well. So get in touch via that way as well. So thank you very much for all the support. I do apologise for the lack of videos. Hopefully I will be back on Friday as well. To look ahead to Manchester City, but as you can hear in my voice, I'm still not particularly well at the moment, still recovering. But the topic I want to discuss today is Bruno Guimaraes and his links to Paris Saint-Germain. Now, if you remember back in September when he signed his new contract, I did a video explaining the release clause in his contract, 100 million plus, and why that might be in there from a Newcastle perspective as well as a Bruno Guimaraes perspective. His agents will always look out for what they think is best for him, and a quick opportunity for progressing his career if things aren't going particularly well at Newcastle will always be something that they'll look at. It doesn't necessarily mean, as I said back then, that he's desperate to leave. He certainly doesn't look it. He certainly isn't desperate to leave. He certainly won't be leaving this month, even though Paris Saint-Germain are interested. That interest is very much there, but also they're interested in Joshua Kimmich from Bayern Munich as well. So they're just looking at different options to strengthen their midfield. Now, you're likely to find that Newcastle are going to be getting calls from big clubs for Bruno over the next few months and years, because he is one of the best midfielders in the world. So that's just part and parcel of the game, unfortunately. But I think that release clause was put in there from a Newcastle perspective as well, because it does well for Newcastle to guarantee that money. Now, the reality of FFP, as I sort of alluded to in my video, Newcastle will need to sell at some point. There will need to be a painful decision at some point. I see a lot of people asking about FFP and why does it seem to impact Newcastle? Why do Newcastle seem to be the only team talking about FFP constantly and having to deal with FFP? And it is true that Newcastle are the ones who constantly mention it, but the reason is because they're probably the only team in the Premier League that are shopping at a different market than they're currently allowed to, given their financial situation. They are trying to break into the top four. They're trying to sign players that Tottenham, Liverpool, Arsenal, Manchester United are trying to sign. That's the type of player that they need to bring in to improve their team. They don't have the income of those clubs, the sponsorship of those clubs, that sort of thing, the revenue of those clubs. These are the sorts of things that mean jumping the queue a bit, like Newcastle have done, is very, very unlikely to be sustainable without a little bit of pain along the way. Now, the likes of Bruno and the likes of Botman and the likes of Isak were signed not with the idea of selling them, but they were signed as players that could be sold down the line for huge profit if possible. And selling Bruno for 100 million plus will allow an ease of FFP situations. Now, Aston Villa are the only club that are really breaking the lines that Newcastle aren't. And the reason that they are able to do that is because they sold Jack Grealish for £100 million, and that was 100% profit as well. That's an academy graduate that's been sold for 100% profit. And that has sold their FFP situation for a long, long time. Now, unfortunately, that's the reality of where Newcastle are. They have to look at selling players down the line. Doesn't mean that that's going to happen this month. I can almost guarantee that Bruno will not be playing at PSG this month, or another player will leave this month. I don't think anyone is going to leave this month. I don't think anything big is going to happen in that sense. But that also means that not very little is going to happen in terms of incomings. As we've seen, it's quiet on the loan front for a midfielder, Kalvin Phillips. The talks are ongoing. Newcastle's interest is still very much there, but it's going to go down to the wire because Newcastle aren't able or willing to meet Manchester City's current demands. The goalkeeper situation, there's no way that Aaron Ramsdale's going to leave Arsenal on loan this month, or at all on loan. I think that he's going to be a permanent sale at a fairly big price from their perspective. That will probably most likely happen in the summer. That's why Newcastle are struggling to bring in incomings. But the reality is that they're going to have to bite the bullet with a player probably down the line. And I think they're preparing that player to be Bruno, because he's the most likely player to get a big money sale, I think. He's obviously the one who's gained the most attention. Newcastle obviously haven't won a game without him, which shows that it's not a good idea to sell him anytime soon, and that's why I don't think it'll happen soon. I believe that the release clause doesn't actually kick in till next summer, but I'm not 100% sure on that, if I'm honest. But the truth is that Newcastle will have to make sacrifices in terms of sales at some point, and Bruno does sort of fit that bill, especially when Sandro Tonali comes back next summer. Clubs will circulate, especially if the Champions League is not attainable this season, because he has said in previous interviews and constantly that he's very happy at Newcastle. He wants to write himself into Newcastle's story, but with the FA Cup really only being the only avenue for success this season, the top four being a more remote situation this season as well, there could be a point where next summer he looks at it and says, "Do you know what? I've sort of come to a close at Newcastle. I can't do much more than I already have. I have to wait a year at least to get back into the Champions League with them." And whether Newcastle also look at it and say, "Okay, well, we'll take a huge profit on you, Bruno, and reinvest with FFP, less of an issue." And I think that that's the truth of the matter with Newcastle and Bruno. This month it's very unlikely. This month I can't imagine that it'll leave, because Newcastle are not in a situation where they'll benefit much from it immediately. Whereas next summer, if they sell him for huge profits, it becomes much clearer what they can do next summer to reinvest. I don't agree with how FFP is working, because it benefits clubs who sell their academy graduates as well. That's the other thing. Do Newcastle have to look into that? The likelihood of selling an Elliot Anderson, a Sean Longstaff, or even a Louis Miley down the line to break the profit lines and get that 100% profit. That's not a really good system for me. It doesn't reward what the right things in football are, which is bringing through your own players. And we spoke about this on the True Faith transfer show, the very first one at the start of at the end of last month. And it really feels like Newcastle are going to have some short-term pain at some stage. I don't think that's going to be this month. I don't think Bruno Guimaraes is going to leave anytime soon. I wouldn't even like to say it'll happen next summer, but I do think without Champions League football, if that is the case, obviously it's not out of the question yet. But without Champions League football, if they do or don't win a trophy, then there feels like the next stage is ending, and whether Bruno looks at his options and finds that he's got plenty of Champions League clubs queuing up for him to pay a fee that Newcastle have dictated will be 3 figures at least, then it could be best for all parties to go ahead and sell and move on. But at the moment, Bruno is not going to go anywhere. I don't think anybody else is either. I'm also not convinced that there'll be much more than a loan signing. I think Kalvin Phillips is a possibility. I wouldn't like to say it's definitely going to happen, but Kalvin Phillips is a player that Newcastle like. A loan move is all they can really do at the moment because of the restrictions of FFP. And as I say, the reason that the FFP situation is seemingly affecting Newcastle most is because no other club is really trying to break the lines like they are. No other club is trying to shop at a different market that they can really afford to. Phillips isn't out of the question, but it'll take quite a while, I think, to get there. Thank you very much for joining me. Once again, I really apologise for the lack of videos. I think you can still hear that I'm not particularly well, but I'll hopefully be back on Friday to look ahead to Manchester City, and I'll catch you next time. Cheers.